The demographics of my audience on this channel are mostly those who are most susceptible to contagious diseases such as SARS and coronavirus. It is therefore most incumbent upon me to pass along this video, which most of you would not otherwise be exposed to due to censorship and complicity of big tech to promote and prioritize the mainstream media fake news propaganda bullshit. I am not an epidemiologist or a doctor. I can only supply information from respected and vetted authoritative sources. China is lying to the world about the extent of this disease and is well on the way from being under a global travel ban. Many countries have recalled their citizens who, upon arrival in their homelands, have tested positive for the disease. Whether or not you believe this outbreak is a deep state distraction, some sort of cabal dead man switch, or demon rat scorched earth retaliation for being caught dead to rights in the ubiquitous corruption and treason of the past few decades, that belief or persuasion doesn't make the threat any less ominous. Whatever you think, you must err on the side of caution and take every reasonable step to avoid getting infected. We will pursue the origins of the thing later. No doubt there are suspicious origins and questionable data that we as real journalists simply do not have the financial resources or the manpower to pursue. Unfortunately, true journalism in the mainstream media is dead, and has been dead and stinking since before the JFK coup. All we can do is pick out the obvious lies and infer, therefore, that the opposite must be true. I have provided links in the description to sources that you should follow regarding this imminent global pandemic. Please limit your travel and personal contacts, and be sure to exercise extreme personal care and hygiene precautions when in public spaces such as stores or shopping malls. Do not touch anything without gloves and soak them in chlorine bleach or 80% isopropyl alcohol when you get back home. It may look silly, but I'd rather look silly and be safe than get infected with this shit.
What if it only took a month? What if in 30 days, world record, we got a new vaccine out in a month? Well, by day 30, if these numbers hold and we don't break the exponential progression of all of this, we would expect worldwide around 115 million cases and 23 million of those going into serious complications requiring hospitalization. Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Martinson of Peak Prosperity here. It is about 12:20 in the afternoon on the 29th of January. This is your coronavirus update, and we're going to begin with the WHO officials say coronavirus spread outside of China is of grave concern. Well, of course it is. Thank you, WHO officials, for finally getting there. I think it's a day late and a dollar short, but we'll take it. Let's start there. Now, first thing I want to talk about today is I'm seeing a lot of people, I think, combating the fear, but I'm not sure what else is going on, by saying stuff like this. This is just from this morning off of Twitter. Somebody here saying, Matt, a radar technician, saying, FYI, panic is being spread. But we already have a virus of our own, and it has been like that for years. So if you fear the coronavirus, you should fear the flu first. It goes on to post that 54 infants have been killed so far. Of course, that is quite the concern. But this kind of information is not helpful because we can't compare the flu to this coronavirus. Why not? Well, let's just do the numbers. This novel coronavirus, nCoV, is much worse than the flu. First, case fatality rate. The flu is about 1%. The nCoV is coming in at about 3% or higher. And that's just a huge difference. And we're going to see about why that's such a big difference and why that's so important in just a second. The R0. Flu is about 1.28. nCoV down here, 2.5 to 3.5, could be higher. We still don't know, but it really, really spreads very easily. And this is the big piece here, of course, the serious complication rate, which requires an ICU bed or equivalent. Flu, it's under 1%. Maybe 200,000 hospital bed used last year for flu patients in the United States. And that was with somewhere between 10 and 50 million people each year are infected by the flu. For nCoV, It's around 20%, at least according to the official data we are getting out of China right now. And of course, we can't trust that too much. But here's why nCoV is way worse than the flu. Huge case fatality rate, the R naught much, much, much higher, and a very high serious complication rate. Again, principally for people over the age of 50. Now let's look here real quick before somebody says, oh, swine flu was bad. Well, here we're comparing on these charts. We've got the nCoV data in yellow, and we've got swine flu in red, which was a pretty big thing, and it was bad. But here we can already see when these get baselined to the days when the tracking really started, that nCoV is already exceeded. I certainly expect this number to be up about here today, the actual case rate. But look at the deaths compared. Swine flu was bad and people feared it, and I think rightfully so to some extent. But look at the death rate in red for swine flu. nCoV has already exceeded that, and we're expecting that number to shoot a lot higher today. So this is worse even than swine flu. It's not even comparable to ordinary seasonal flu. It's worse than the swine flu. All right, I want to continue on with what I consider to be a almost criminally bad misinformation campaign, and maybe this just speaks to the absolute deplorable state of science education in the U.S. these days. But here's CNN. Here's CNN out just yesterday. This came out on the 28th. So here they're talking about how this outbreak compares with SARS. Well, look, everybody, aren't you comforted? We've got this many cases and this many deaths, and SARS was worse. There you go. There's your comparison. And also death rate, 2.2%. And again, they're making a huge mistake here by simply dividing that number by that number. You can't do that. Why? Because there's about a 7-day lag between the time you are identified and the time you die. So you actually need to compare this number to how big this number was 7 days ago. And that's a very different death rate. And we won't know that number until all is said and done. With SARS, we have the final numbers. We have how many confirmed cases there were. We know how many deaths there were, whether they're right or wrong. Those are the official numbers. And that gives you that death rate. But here, very misleadingly, CNN is trying to say, look, there's fewer cases and a lower death rate. That's the comparison they're making. And even Statista, who I expect a lot more from, because these people, their whole job and reason for being is statistics. Here they're using a bar chart comparing coronaviruses with SARS. They are saying that it exceeds the SARS outbreak, but how do you make sense of these? How do you compare these two numbers? It's very difficult. I don't even know what to make of this, because this is a time series data. So let's look at this on a time series basis. Here what we've done, again, I think I've shown this one before, but let's cover it because it's important. These have been baseline from days from the first infection that's recorded, and we're putting them on the similar timeline. So here we are, approaching 50 days after nCoV is first detected, and here's how many people have been infected. SARS really cooked along for a long time. Not much happened before it started to take off, but it never achieved this perfect exponential sort of a spread rate. It was a little bit lower and slower than that because it didn't spread quite the same. And of course, as we went over, coronaviruses right now, yes, they are exponential because we put that data we saw in yellow is now on a log chart here, flat lines for death, flat line here for as well for cases. So that means it's still in the logarithmic phase, and that's getting really important because, so we see here from Bianco Research, they put in actual blue data, as blue as in reported infections. And by the way, we all think the reports are low, either because the testing wasn't in place or China is politically suppressing that information. Get to that in just a second. But for whatever reason, even if we just use the reported infections, this is on a log chart and over time. And here you can see that if this is right, in the next few days, we're going to be up near 20,000 reported cases and deaths to follow along. Now, why is this really important? Why do I want to cover this? Because we are still in the log phase of this. Listen, that could change. Maybe these all the pandemic preparations in China do actually dial back the rate of spread. But right now, the data we have says it's still in the logarithmic phase. So I want to draw your attention back here to dot 3, bullet point 3, where I said serious complication rate, which requires an ICU bed of around 20%. The Bianco research, that's great. It goes out a couple of days. What happens if we go even further? By the way, this is about a 40% daily increase. So if we set the rate of cases to 40% and we ask the question with serious complications at 20%, what would we expect? So I built this spreadsheet a couple days ago. Here at day 0, that would have been on the 28th. We would have expected 4,774 cases and about 1,000 serious complications. That's exactly what we saw yesterday. In yellow are the numbers I'm expecting to be reported by the end of today at the 29th. But then we just carry this forward, growing by 40%, and serious complications tracking that at 20%. You've heard probably, hey, there could be a flu vaccine. an nCoV vaccine coming out. That would be great. What if it only took a month? What if in 30 days, world record, we got a new vaccine out in a month? Well, by day 30, if these numbers hold and we don't break the exponential progression of all of this, we would expect worldwide around 115 million cases and 23 million of those going into serious complications requiring hospitalization. Just to put that number in perspective, in the United States, there are about just under 100,000 ICU beds. Most of them are actually already full, so there aren't 100,000 just sitting around waiting to be used. But this is a worldwide number. Most of those actually would be in China. And then finally, just to finish this out, my biggest concern, or a huge concern for me right now, is that I'm just operating like you with very poor information. Forget CNN and Statista trying to mislead us with bar charts and crazy square area diagrams. I haven't found any unofficial news from private citizens out of China for about 48 hours now. Remember, 2-3 days ago, there were all those videos of people in hospital beds and in the hospital waiting areas and even lying in the hallways. I've only seen state-sponsored or approved news, and just to show you what I mean by that, let's look here. On Twitter, I go to coronavirus, scrolling through the top feeds. This video is from several days ago. We've got, of course, this is state-sanctioned, the whole idea of the people of Wuhan excitedly, cheering for themselves. So that made it out. But really nothing else. We're not seeing in here a lot of private videos from inside China. This is, of course, state-sanctioned. They want everybody to see how great they're doing building that big new hospital. Lots of videos about that, hundreds. But otherwise, we're just seeing things from outside of China. This is from Cape Town. As well, when we go over to Reddit, this used to be my favorite Reddit thread. It's since been moderated into uselessness. For me, I've had to find other avenues for information, but this is our China flu. This kind of thing, when I sort by new or even hot, either way, what we used to see was a lot of videos and pictures from inside those hospital facilities, and we're just not seeing those anymore. So those have all been clamped down. And there's information here, but we're not seeing a lot from inside China. So yes, that concerns me. And that is my biggest concern right now, is I can't get good data that I trust, and even the anecdotes that give me a sense of where we are. It could be worse. It could be better. The lack of information is troubling. So thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
The information presented here is factual. It is a scientific analysis of where this virus could spread and how devastating it could be. You will not see any of this on the fake news mainstream media, and it is all the more reason that you should simply regard it as The Onion or comedy at its worst, and simply turn that shit off. This virus is a very real threat, and by distracting you with fake news, the mainstream media is, in effect, trying to kill you. Since there are no credible journalists in the mainstream media anymore, I must suggest they adopt a new motto. If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit.
Chris Martinson here with your coronavirus update. It is Tuesday, January 28th. It's 10:07 in the morning. First, the numbers. Let's look here. The total cases are now 4,474, 107 deaths. Nearly all of those cases are in China, of course, but we have 18 other countries now that have reported cases. That's a really strong increase, and of course, no surprise, because it looks like we're seeing an exponential increase in cases. No surprise there, especially with an R0 that we think now is somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5, and I'm getting that information from some real leading experts on these sorts of things. Here we're seeing the number of cases on the left scale and the number of deaths down below. You know what? Those kind of look exponential, and you know how we would check that out if that's true? Well, we'd put this data on a semi-log chart and take a peek. So this is your log chart, and we do indeed see the flat lines that we would expect to see if the cases are increasing exponentially. So that's actually happening. But let's quick go to some good news around all of this first. Here's something I just want to point out for you. I found this great update by user Ketchup over here on Reddit. Current status of outside of China patients. I do trust the data that comes from outside of China, so let's run through this real quickly. Thailand had 5 cases, reporting all of them cured. Singapore, all 5 of their cases initially now are reported as stable, which is good. France had 3 cases, all stable, moderate fever. Malaysia, 4 cases. Again, stable condition. Japan actually has a second case now we have to talk about, and I will in a second, but 1 cured and released. South Korea, 55-year-old suffering from pneumonia and on treatment. This bears watching because, again, this virus is a lot more devastating for people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So the older you are, the harder this one is to get past without serious complications or death. We don't have a lot of information regarding the other 3 infected yet, but it looks like it's in Korea. No surprise there. Nepal, the only infected is a 32-year-old, recovered and discharged. Again, not much of a surprise given the age. United States, we're seeing here not a lot of details from some places, but a woman in her 60s seems to be doing well after treatment. Case in Arizona, not hospitalized, recovering at home. Vietnam, father and son, recovering. Fever has abated. Australia, 3 people, a man in stable condition, a woman in her 50s, currently on treatment, maybe no surprise given the age, a 21-year-old woman, stable, fine, seems to be walking around. Canada, mild, self-isolation. Taiwan, all 5 in stable condition. Cambodia, now stable. Germany, good condition. Hong Kong, all stable. So the pattern I'm seeing there is that with appropriate treatment, this seems to be kind of like the flu. So that's really good news. What we're worried about, of course, is that with that exponential increase in cases, what happens when your medical system is overwhelmed? You get very different outcomes because I'm sure these people are all receiving the very best of care. But what happens if you have suddenly tens of thousands or more of these cases that you have to treat, and that overwhelms your medical system? All right, so moving on. Before we go there, I want to go to here and talk about this. This is the other case from Japan. So Japan and Germany both now confirm patients who caught the disease who did not visit China. And this one from Japan really actually concerns me a little bit. So we now have a new case, which is a Japanese tour bus driver in his 60s who had driven 2 groups of Chinese tourists who had come from Wuhan earlier this month. So we have a bus driver who's now caught this disease who had driven around Chinese tourists earlier this month. Well, it's the 28th of January. I don't know what earlier means, but this is not a good sign because presumably this person caught it. Who else caught it on that bus potentially? Who has this bus driver given it to? Since we don't know any of those answers to any of those questions at this point. But this now, I think, derelict for the WHO organization not to say, yeah, we actually have a real problem here, given the exponential increase and given all that. As we continue on, we'll notice that we've seen Tibet close their border. Kyrgyzstan has now closed their border. Mongolia did it yesterday. Hong Kong is taking more serious measures. We even see in places like down in Australia, the coronavirus here sparks petition from Sydney Chinese community urging the government to ban students. So this is a pretty, I think an ordinary response, and it makes a lot of sense. And I'm writing about all of this, but I just put out an article this morning talking about a secondary derivative impact. Of course, the concern for life, limb health of your family, of the people, of the population, that's paramount. But the derivative impact can be just as damaging for people and can be just as harmful, and that includes this idea that what are the economic impacts going to be? Everybody's starting to talk about this a little bit. Here's a nice Bloomberg article about that. Virus poses new threat to world economies, fragile stabilization, and that with all the Fed and central bank printing despite their best efforts. Here's why this concerns me a lot, because I can't figure this out yet. All I can do is show you some of the information. This is the Beijing West Railroad Station, which is just normally tens of thousands of people thronged. Good luck trying to even walk a straight line without bumping into people. It's completely deserted. So how much economic activity is not happening because people aren't going to work, aren't going to their jobs? This is, people aren't avoiding the railroad station and getting across and around town by other means. They're just simply not going anywhere. We see that confirmed as well. Here's a video clip out of Shanghai. I mean, this is normally like all cities in the world, but in China in particular, this would be absolutely crammed. Trucks, cars, buses, all going places, all taking people to and from various economic activities. So we can't even predict what this means yet, but I can tell you that this is the equivalent of maybe putting a stick in the front spokes of a bicycle wheel. It's just an immediate cessation of activity. Meanwhile, of course, in the United States, in the overnight, we see the markets were crammed and they fell off a little bit and they got crammed up again. This is all the attempts by the plunge protect. Look, 20 points on the S&P. The world is safe, people. Make sure you go out and buy another Ram 250 truck or whatever the story, Ram 2500 or F250. Go out and buy stuff. I mean, this is just ridiculous that the only thing that the Federal Reserve and plunge protection team or whoever else is involved in this, what they need to do is just cram the markets higher. That's the response. But if all you have is a hammer, I guess everything looks like a nail. Meanwhile, what can the Fed not do by printing? Well, they can't really control what's going to happen to the larger global economy. So here we're looking at the London Metal Exchange and copper really down, because what can the Fed and the other central banks not do by printing? They can't make the planes take off and burn jet fuel. They can't make the factories run and consume copper. So we're already seeing some of the impacts out on the side of this, and we're tracking that very closely. We think that the markets have not yet fully appreciated what it really means to the global economy to see no cars and trucks on the roads of Shanghai or Beijing and other cities, and to see no people moving through the railroad systems there, railway systems and subway systems, and seeing no flights taking off from a number of major areas now. We think that's underappreciated. That's what we're talking about now at Peak Prosperity. We've got an article about that because it is time, we think, to begin looking at that. Tons of other data I've got to go through here, but we'll get to that next. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon.
Please subscribe to our backup channels, Net4Truth USA 2 Patriot channel, BitChute.com/net4TruthUSA, and drop.space/@Net4TruthUSA. We fly so close to the target, we are on our 5th fighter jet. We will be relentless and persistent until the enemies of freedom are defeated. You can support this channel by using the links in the description, but for a $100 donation, I will personally send you a autographed hardcover special edition copy of Land of Childhood's Fears. Also, visit my bookstore at lulu.com/Net4TruthUSA. If you are viewing this video on BitChute, you can use the links in the description to support us, or simply click the green $ dot on our video to support this channel. Thank you. Links are in the description section.